So I think it's really hard to separate these questions of how these tools reshape our lives and our human connections without thinking about who owns them and why they're being designed the way they are. And I think for now, they're owned by increasingly monopolistic companies that are designing them to extract a maximum of time spent or attention out of the people who use them. And that can have a limiting effect on how useful they are for seeking love.
Good evening and welcome to Cambridge Forum in Harvard Square. Thank you for joining us in this post-Valentine's Day event. Tonight we've assembled a truly eclectic array of guests to address the complex subject of romance in the information age. Part of our presentation this evening will be rendered in prose, part in poetry, and the rest in music. I'm Mary Stack, the director of Cambridge Forum, and tonight we're delighted to have two speakers, one actor and three musicians, all to help us unravel some of the mysteries of modern romance. We of course value your comments, and there will be ample time to take questions at the end of the presentation. Friendships and love affairs were once the glorious domain of pen and paper, where lovers poured forth their souls. We wrote, kept, and treasured love letters. Now they have become mere electronic transactions, executed and terminated in a few tapped texts. Despite this, we are still visiting poets.org by the millions in search of the right words with which to express our innermost feelings. Tonight, we're going to consider what we have lost and what we have gained through digital intimacy. And first, I'll introduce our guests. Kurt DiCamillo is the curator of special collections at the New England Historical Genealogical Society. Dr. Maura Weigel is postdoctoral fellow at Harvard University and author of Labor of Love, The Invention of Dating. Johnny Lee Davenport is an actor extraordinaire, and we have three fine blues musicians, Lenny Peterson, Mark Campbell, and Tim Paul. So first, we're going to begin with art historian Kurt DiCamillo, who has brought with him some artifacts as a way of explaining why, historically, we've always written and treasured love letters and other such ephemera. Is this practice over? And did he send or receive any Valentines himself yesterday?
Thank you very much. I have to say, I don't think that love has actually changed that much. I think humanity has remained unchanged, and therefore love is unchanged. And how we express it is all that's really changed. Unfortunately, for those of you in the audience, you can't see these things too well, but what I have here are things that I've taken from the collection of the New England Historic Genealogical Society, and they all involve hair, which, believe it or not, was a way to express your love. This, for instance, is a hair bracelet. This is all hair, sort of creepy. Here, very deceivingly, is a cameo on one side, and on the other, in the back, is a lock of hair. And then lastly, this is a brooch that has a rock crystal facing with two different colors of hair, which probably indicates that the two lovers are having their hair entwined. Something that we probably don't realize today is that this was the highest sort of evidence of love, was to give somebody a bit of your hair. And most interestingly to me is that hair is sort of like Dorian Gray. When you cut it, it stopped aging. So you have somebody who's in their 80s and dying, has white hair, and they can look back to a locket that their mother gave them when they were 5 that has bright red hair in it. And that's what's most amazing today, is this hair is unchanged in the color it was when it was first given. I think these kinds of things have sort of fallen out, but there are other things as well. I don't have any in our collections, but I brought with me a book on eye jewelry. This is actually something that really only existed for about 20, 30 years in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. What I'm holding up here is an eye painted in ivory surrounded by garnets. Almost exclusively, this was done with one eye because you were meant to keep your lover's secret. If you did both eyes, you could probably identify who they were. You didn't want that. You wanted to keep it a secret, oftentimes because of illicit love affairs. We do know that this whole pattern was something that was started in England by the Prince Regent, later King George IV, who was having affairs all the time and didn't want anybody to know who he was having an affair with. So he married a number of times clandestinely and exchanged eyes painted in ivory with his lovers. And I think that's an amazing way to think of things. This is meant to be a secret love, the I that only you would know, and the two of you would come together, or with this hair that we have here. Something, as I say, I think we think of today as being sort of creepy, but in fact, it's not creepy at all. It's something that's a part of you that will forever remain at the time you cut it. But I think most of us, when we think about hair, when we think about love, of course love is hair, think about love letters. And I was very lucky that the archives where I work at the New England Historic Genealogical Society very kindly on one day's notice came up with a love letter for me, dated December 18th, 1844, from a man named Ira Smith, who was a student at the Yale Seminary, writing to his sweetheart, Sarah Bartholomew. And it's 3 pages, of which I will only give you the first sentence because I found it rather sweet. He said, "I'm almost sick tonight, entirely unfit for study. I can do nothing but sit alone in my room and think of you." Now, what's interesting about this, we have 3 years of their correspondence. This one's dated, as I said, December 18th, 1844. We have 1843 to 1846. 5 years of courting. It's almost very, very unlikely they ever would have had sex until they got married, and they did get married in 1846. But I love this, how he signs this letter. "From your sincere and ardent lover, I.H. Smith." The fact that he would use that sign-off when he had probably never even kissed her, but yet attach with it his formal name at the same time. What's interesting about this, if we trace their letters, is that he felt he was unworthy of being a priest going into the calling. He graduated from Yale Seminary, then he married his wife, and they moved to Topeka, Kansas, just before the Civil War, where he became first a miner and then a farmer, which is something you would not expect somebody growing up and going to school in New Haven and Yale to do. And I think this is something that's so important too. I would almost guarantee you that they exchanged hair at some point. Something I think we have to bring back into the lexicon, hair exchange. It's so unusual for us to think that love is somehow different today. It is different in the sense that we express it electronically, but I do believe that people want to express love in old-fashioned ways. I was saying to this young lady earlier that there was an article I read in the New York Times about a 20-something who wrote about her desire to get away from an electronic calendar and have paper, and the sensualness of paper and writing things down on paper and the quality of the paper. And I think that's the same thing with love, and that's why, in answer to your question, I did receive a Valentine. This is the Valentine I received yesterday at work. I love anything that sparkles, and it has a very small inscription on the back, but I think this kind of stuff, something that's tactile, that we can touch, means so much more than a text. I'm embarrassed to say that I did send Valentines, but they were all texts or emails. I am embarrassed because I love this sort of thing, but I didn't take the time to do it, and I think that's what it comes down to. Love hasn't changed. The way we express it really hasn't changed. It's just, will we give ourselves the time to say it's worth it to buy a card, to sit down, address the envelope, put a stamp on it, walk to the mailbox and mail it, because that's what people don't do anymore. Electronic communication makes it too easy. And that's why I think when someone does receive a letter or a card, it has so much more impact than when I was growing up, because then that was the only way to communicate. And now this takes us, this answers, I think, a part of the human soul. We want to feel appreciated in something tangible. And showing someone a text or a photograph on your phone sent from your boyfriend or girlfriend isn't the same as saying, look at this. And in this case, it sparkles. Thank you very much.
So now we're going to bring the discussion up to the present day with Dr. Maura Ugel, who's on the cutting edge, really, of studying the latest trends in dating and algorithmic intimacy. In the book, Labor of Love, The Invention of Dating, she says, dating is a precarious form of contemporary labor, an unpaid internship. You cannot be sure where things are heading, but you try to gain experience, and if you look sharp, you might get a free lunch. So, have reports of the death of dating been greatly exaggerated? I'm going to turn things over to you, Maura.
Hi, all. I'm the bad millennial on stage, so I brought my phone, and I'm going to read a couple of notes from it, and then read a bit from an essay on the topics that Mary alluded to that speaks a little bit to the ways in which dating changes in history and changes in particular with our economy. So I love beginning this little spiel that I'm giving with this question: has the death of dating, have reports of the death of dating been greatly exaggerated? And I would say that my answer to that question, the simple answer, is yes, the reports have been exaggerated. And the slightly more complicated answer would start with a question, which is, what is dating? How would we define it? Y'all are lucky that we're not in a classroom, or I would call on you. But anyway, so I think this question, what is dating, is actually a harder question to answer than one might immediately think. And what's interesting when we think about both contemporary life and social history is that it usually gets articulated, this definition, in moments of crisis. So you're much more likely to read an article saying, young people aren't dating anymore, or, we're living in the age of a Tinder apocalypse, or, love is dead, than an article articulating, here's what we think love should be, or perhaps more to the point, here's how we believe gender roles should be. I think that my interest in dating started not because I'd been obsessed with romance, although I, like anyone, enjoy talking about sex and romance, but because I think dating is a kind of theater in which we try on and rehearse different roles, and it can feel like a very experimental form of theater in the present day. But I think that these conversations, surely folks, if you read mainstream magazines or blogs or newspapers, you from time to time see these articles. I feel like there was a real spate of them around 2013, 2014 when I started thinking about this topic. But these articles that say, kids are going out on their cell phones, men aren't taking women out on dates anymore, expressing these kinds of anxieties. And what's interesting to me is what those articles suggest. I think a lot of the source of their appeal is actually this often quite, in my view, sort of regressive notion about how men are supposed to be, how women are supposed to be, how heterosexuality is supposed to be. So I think that's enough by way of preliminary remarks, and I'll jump right into reading this essay adapted from my book. I hope in the Q&A that we can talk a bit about technologies too. Founded and edit a magazine about technology called Logic, and think a lot about how the interfaces we use or the apps we use shape our relationships for better and worse. I think technologies are tools, and they can be used to make us happier or more oppressed, depending. A lot depends on who owns them and what they're designed for, as well as how we use them. But anyway, for now, I think I'll just read this essay about what I call sexual freelancing in the gig economy. If it seems like I'm trying to be funny, I probably am, so thank you. Sexual freelancing in the gig economy. A friend of mine complains about how many of the men she meets on Tinder use corporate language to chat her up. First, they reach out. Then, after spending the night together, they follow up. This kind of flirting is banal, but it makes sense. We constantly use economic metaphors to describe our romantic and sexual relations. Few people today refer to women as, quote, damaged goods, I hope, or wonder why a man would, quote, buy the cow when he can get the milk for free. My friend's mom had the riposte to that, which was why buy the pig when you could have the sausage for free, which I liked as a kind of equal opportunity disgusting metaphor, once again, for heterosexuality. Anyway, why would you buy the cow when you can get the milk for free? But we do have friends with benefits, and we, quote, invest in relationships. An ex may be on or off the market. Online dating makes shopping around explicit. Blog after blog strategizes about how to maximize your ROI, return on investment, on OkCupid. We use this kind of language because the ways that people date, who contacts whom, where they meet, and what happens next, have always been tied to the economy. Dating applies the logic of capitalism to courtship. On the dating market, everyone competes for him or herself. When parents worry about how their 20-something kids are or aren't pairing off, or the authors of trend pieces lament the death of courtship, they seem to forget that the pursuit of sex and romance didn't remain unchanged from the moment when the first Homo sapiens sidled across the savannah towards his soulmate until Steve Jobs rolled out his iPhone. If you want to understand why Netflix and chill has replaced dinner and a movie, you need to look at how people work. Today, people are constantly told that we must be flexible and adaptable in order to succeed. Is it surprising that these values are reshaping how many of us approach sex and love? Back when most people punch clocks at fixed hours, a date might have asked, "Shall I pick you up at 6?" But part-timers, contractors, and other contingent workers, who constitute some 40% of the American workforce, are more inclined to text one another, "You still up?" than to make plans in advance. Smartphones have altered expectations about when we are on and off, and working from home or from cafes has blurred the lines between labor and leisure. My dad, by the way, read this essay and he now texts me, "You up?" because he totally misunderstood the point of that text. He texted me that at 9:30 a.m. yesterday. I was like, "Yeah, Dad, I'm awake." The average American may not be asking someone out on a date today because he works longer hours than he used to. The 2013 and 2014 Work and Education poll conducted by Gallup found that the average full-time American worker reported working 47 hours per week. Moreover, 21% of the people surveyed reported working 50 to 59 hours per week. Another 18% said they worked 60 hours or more per week. So 50% more hours than pick you up at 6 era. And those are just hours on the clock. They don't include the time spent outside normal hours answering emails or maintaining a winning social media presence, activities that many jobs require. Follow me on Twitter. In other words, single people today tend to work longer hours than they would have in the Norman Rockwell soda fountain era that many people seem to have in mind when they get misty-eyed about traditional dating. No surprise that they have less time and energy left, however, to go out. In most times and places, matchmaking rituals have been designed to lead to marriage and reproduction. In the case of dating, the goals of your endeavor are less clear. Many single Americans hope to find more than someone to binge-watch Breaking Bad and have sex with. 53% of never-married Americans still say they want to get married someday. But marriage rates have declined significantly since 1960. The median age of first marriage has risen to a record high. It's 27 for women and 29 for men. Sometimes social class can make a difference. Growing numbers of working-class Americans are eschewing marriage and having children outside of marriage. In a 2013 study conducted by researchers at Harvard and the University of Virginia, working-class respondents cited low wages and a lack of job security as the primary reason for these changes. But a high average salary doesn't necessarily mean stable relationships. A 2013 report called Not Yet, K-N-O-T, when you get into this field, you encounter puns, hilarious puns like K-N-O-T for not, regularly. A report called Not Yet, The Benefits and Costs of Delayed Marriage in America, observed that young adults have gone from seeing marriage as a, quote, cornerstone of adult life to its capstone, something you enter only after you complete your education and attain professional stability. Until then, you may be better off swiping through Tinder. Still, and here's where I get to the positive part, still, for all the challenges, it's worth noting that the gig economy has also brought some much-needed flexibility to dating and relationships. Young women today face less pressure to build their lives around marriage and childbearing than their mothers and grandmothers did. If you are gay or lesbian, or if you want a relationship that is not monogamous, you are likely to meet less resistance than you might have in the past. Still, as the work of dating has become increasingly flexible, it has also become increasingly precarious. This will sound familiar from current events. Dating itself is a recent invention. It developed when young people began moving to cities and women began working outside private homes, and that's a big part of the point of my book. The history of dating is a feminist history, intimately tied to women entering the workforce. By 1900, 44% of single American women worked, 44%. Previously, courtship had taken place under adult supervision in private places, a parlor, a factory dance, or a church social. But once women started going out and earning wages, they had more freedom over where and how they met prospective mates. And because men vastly out-earned women, they typically paid for entertainment. People are always asking me, should you let a man pay on a date? And I say, it's just wage redistribution until we get better than that, 77 cents on the dollar. 64 cents for African-American women and 56 for Latina, I think. So that assuages guilt at letting men pay. Today we refer to a man inviting a woman to dinner as traditional. At first, it was scandalous. A woman who arranged to meet a man at a bar or restaurant could find herself being interrogated by a vice commission. True story. In the 1920s and 30s, as more and more middle-class women started going to college, parents and faculty panicked over what they called rating and dating culture, which led kids to participate in petting parties and to take joyrides with members of the opposite sex. By the 1950s, a new kind of dating took over, going steady. Popular advice columnist Dorothy Dix, who was then the most widely syndicated female writer in America, warned in 1939 that going steady was, quote, insane folly. But by the post-war era of full employment, this form of courtship made perfect sense. The booming economy, which was targeting the newly flush teen demographic, dictated that in order for everyone to partake in new consumer pleasures, for everyone to go out for a burger or root beer float on weekends, young people had to pair off. Today, the economy is transforming courtship yet again. But the changes aren't only practical. The economy shapes our feelings and values as well as our behaviors. The generation of Americans that came of age around the time of the 2008 financial crisis have been told constantly that we must be flexible and adaptable. Is it so surprising that we have turned into sexual freelancers? Many of us treat relationships like unpaid internships. We cannot expect them to lead to anything long-term, so we use them to get experience. If we look sharp, we might get a free lunch, as Mary said. But for all the hand-wringing, this kind of dating isn't any more transactional than it was back when suitors paid women family-supervised visits, or parents sought out a yenta to introduce their children at a synagogue mixer. Courtship has always been dictated by changes in the market. The good news is that dating is not the exact same thing as love. And as anyone who has ever been in love can attest, the laws of supply and demand do not control our feelings. Thanks.
Wow, there's a lot of statistics to absorb there, a lot. So now we get to the fun part before we have our own discussion and questions. We're going to invite the artists up because they're going to express the things that some of us can't say. Johnny's going to do it with poetry, but music, probably the ultimate non-verbal prompt to love. So, come aboard.
How's everybody this evening? You can talk. Everybody all right? All right. I'm going to start out with some William Shakespeare, probably one of the most prolific and certainly one of the best writers of all time. This is Sonnet 29. When in disgrace with fortune and in men's eyes, I, all alone, beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look at myself and curse my fate, wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him, like him with friends possessed, having this man's art and that man's scope, with what I most enjoy, contented least. Desiring that man's art and that man's scope. Yet, in these thoughts, myself almost despising, haply, I think on thee. And then my state, like to the lark at break of day, arising from sullen earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate. For thy sweet love remembered such wealth brings. But then I scorn to change my state with kings. Isn't it funny when you hear music, how somehow the words come? If I hum to you, all you need is love. You know immediately what the song was. This one is called Love by Rupert Brooke. Love is a breach in the walls, a broken gate, where that comes in that shall not go again. Love sells the proud heart's citadel to fate. They have known shame who love unloved, even then when two mouths thirsty each for each find slaking, and agonies forgot, and hush the crying of credulous hearts in heaven. Such are but taking their own poor dreams within their arms, and lying each in his lonely night, each with a ghost. Some share that night, but they know love grows colder, grows false and dull, that was sweet lies at most. Astonishment is no more in hand or shoulder, but darkens and dies out from kiss to kiss. All this is love, and all love is but this. Yours by Daniel Hoffman. I am yours as the summer air at evening is possessed by the scent of linden blossoms. As the snow cap gleams with light, lent it by the brimming moon. Without you, I'd be an unleafed tree, blasted in a bleakness with no spring. Your love is the weather of my being. What is an island without the sea? When I Love by Nazir Kabani. When I love, I feel I am king of time. I possess the earth and everything on it, and ride into the sun upon my horse. When I love, I become liquid light, invisible to the eye. And the poems in my notebooks become fields of mimosa and poppy. When I love, the water gushes from my fingers, grass grows on my tongue. When I love, I become time outside all time. When I love a woman, all the trees run barefoot toward me. Funeral Blues by W.H. Auden. Stop all the clocks. Cut off the telephone. Prevent the dog from barking with a juicy bone. Silence the pianos. And with muffled drum bring out the coffin. Let the mourners come. Let airplanes circle moaning overhead, scribbling in the sky the message: he is dead. Put crepe bows round the necks of the public doves. Let the traffic policemen wear black cotton gloves. He was my north, my south, my east and west, my working week, and my Sunday rest, my noon, my midnight, my talk, my song. I thought that love would last forever. I was wrong. The stars are not wanted now. Put out everyone. Pack up the moon and dismantle the sun. Pour away the ocean and sweep up the wood. For nothing now can ever come to any good. This one is For What Binds Us by Jane Hirschfeld. There are names for what binds us. Strong force, weak forces. Look around, you can see them. The skin that forms in a half-empty cup, nails rusting into the places they join, joints dovetailed on their own weight. The way things stay so solidly wherever they've been set down. And gravity, scientists say, is weak. And see how the flesh grows back across a wound with a great vehemence, more strong than the simple, untested surface before. There's a name for it on horses. When it comes back darker and raised, proud flesh. As all flesh is proud of its wounds, wears them as honors given out after battle, small triumphs pinned to the chest. And when two people have loved each other, see how it is like a scar between their bodies, stronger, darker, and proud. How the black cord makes them a single fabric that nothing can tear or bend. My Romance. This is Touched by an Angel by Maya Angelou. We, unaccustomed to courage, exiles from delight, live coiled in shells of loneliness until love leaves its high holy temple and comes into our sight to liberate us into life. Love arrives, and in its train come ecstasies, old memories of pleasure, ancient histories of pain. Yet if we are bold, love strikes away the chains of fear from our souls. We are weaned from our timidity in the flush of love's light. We dare be brave, and suddenly we see that love costs all we are and will ever be. Yet it is only love which sets us free.
Magnificent array of talent and words. We had the non-verbal, that we all knew the words to everything that they played, and we also had Shakespeare and finished with Maya Angelou. So thank you so much. That was fantastic. Thank you. Now we get to your part, where we're interested in knowing, that must have elicited feelings in some of you, good, bad, or indifferent. So I welcome you up to the microphone to ask any question you like. I'd be interested in knowing how many of you sent a Valentine or texted a Valentine yesterday. And if you have kept any memorable texts on your phone, because where do you keep all these things now? On a cloud, I guess. So if all your memories are on clouds, how do you access your favorite love letters? Do you go to your favorite texts? Come up.
I can't resist. Can you hear me? To begin with, Mary, did you put this program together? This is absolutely brilliant. I mean, where could you ever find a program with such mixed talent and media as this? It's just absolutely remarkable. When I think of romance, I'm often think, maybe partly because of my age, I partly think of not Valentines and dating and such, but in the academic sense of the word romance, which years ago even war was considered a romance. And in view of that, I've come to, sorry I'm not asking questions, I'm kind of going on here, but I think of music. What a perfect pairing with the subject from the two speakers, because more and more I think of music as the only true harmony in the world. And you know, that's I said that in one sentence, but that's a pretty complicated subject right there, and you could really talk about that at length. We obviously know the lack of harmony there is all over in so many places, but what's an excellent display of what I consider true harmony. Mr. Genetics, you, sorry for forgetting the name.
That's all right.
But you brought something to mind, and I don't know if there's a direct correlation, but I've read more and heard NPR programs about the written word as compared to typing on a keyboard, and tests where they've brought control groups in and had half the group read something from a screen and the other half read something from paper. And the retention and understanding was absolutely mind-boggling. I'm thinking of what you talked about in paper. The group that read it on paper, it was overwhelming. Then another control group is brought in, and now they're even told ahead, you that are reading it on a screen are at a tremendous disadvantage. And you had to maybe take notes, you had to read more carefully. And the group reading it on screen still failed, even under those circumstances. So when you talked about paper and the meaning of writing it, then there's a whole other subject of when you write, the connection of your hand with your brain, and you remember more than you do when you type. And anyway, thank you for listening.
So what's the question?
What's the question? I honestly don't have one. I'm inspired by all of you, and just it felt like I had something to contribute.
I'm going to segue in what you said about NPR, because I heard this 2-3 days ago in NPR. A young African-American author, it sounds like she was in her 20s, chooses to only write on a typewriter, a Smith Corona, I believe, from the 1940s. And this to me is very heartwarming, being in my late 50s, because she grew up with computers. She's choosing to write on a typewriter, and having grown up with a manual typewriter, that is a bitch. Those keys get all clumped up together. You have to press really hard. But she says the process is so important to her, and that it forces her to think as she writes. She doesn't write longhand, she only writes on the typewriter. All her thoughts go there. And she said the thought process and putting it that way as opposed to putting it on paper or putting it on a computer is completely different. And I thought that was very, very interesting. Thank you.
Do you have something to add?
Oh, sure. I have lots of them. Oh my gosh, listen how big my voice is. Yeah, there are lots of different thoughts. I was actually having a separate question I wanted to ask Kurt about your museum and your work there, because I was curious. You brought these wonderful objects for us, but I know you work at a museum of genealogy, and we were talking before the program about folks who come in and want to know their past or where they're descended from, to go back very deep potentially. And I was thinking how many of our ideas about love and romance are sort of inherited in this semi-conscious way from parents or grandparents or forms of culture that we've seen that are older. And so I guess just hearing you describe the museum was making me want to ask you about whether the relationship between genealogy and romance, or whether you see any relations there. I mean, romance is dating. What I've written about is, for all its flaws, still the mechanism our culture primarily relies on to like reproduce the world, right? To make it keep going. And I think that these questions are actually very serious. So I was just curious about to hear you riff on genealogy and romance.
I'm not a genealogist. I'm an historian, so I'm not directly into that part of the world. But the reason we have an art collection, should any of you wonder, at the New England Historical Genealogical Society, is because people give us papers of their family's history, which is what we mainly want. And oftentimes, after somebody dies, they say to us, listen, you can have all the papers, but you gotta take this stuff too, because we don't want to deal with it, which is the furniture, the paintings, all kinds of things. So our art came to us sort of by accident over the last 175 years. And it tells part of the story as well, and that's why I'm here, which is to say these papers that talk about love and talk about marriage and talk about death are important, but these things are just as important because they're physical manifestations of who these people were, especially if we have a portrait, which we get of someone in there. But the letters, yes, absolutely. We have so many love letters. It blows my mind just how much passion is in these letters. And also how much people separated themselves from death and from hurt, because the reason people had so many children, certainly in the 18th and 19th centuries, is because you expected so many of them to die. So you had 10 kids and hoping maybe 5 of them would make it. So when a child dies, we're oftentimes taken aback by the lack of emotion that a parent shows. Even they're writing about, Bob died last week. The corn's getting really tall. It shows you the difference in what medicine's given us and how we can live differently. But I don't think that means that these people were any less emotional. It means that they had sort of steeled themselves for living in a different world, where part of the thing was people die. The two most common ways for women to die, for instance, and this is not really germane at all, just I find it interesting. Childbirth, that's no surprise to anybody. Kitchen fires were the second way, because they wore these long skirts. These are open fires. They caught on fire and they could not be put out in time. And those things that tell us who we are, and I think your essay was so good at talking about Norman Rockwell world. I heard George Will years ago say this about the American ideal. Now I'm getting really far afield here. And he said, this idea of every generation making more money than the one before it, giving better education, is completely anomalous to who we are. It all started after World War II with the GI Bill. Until then, something I never forgot, World War I, so early 20th century, that's a single digit, 9% of Americans had a bachelor's degree. This idea of continual improvement is completely new. It's a 20th century invention that we should expect more than our parents' generation. We should make more money. We should be more successful. We should have more children. We should be happier. That's a whole new concept into life, and that did not exist in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. People looked at life completely differently. They looked at love the same way, but love was so transient because so many people died, not just children. People in your life just died. I mean, you could get an abscessed tooth, boom, you're gone. That's the difference, I think. That's the only difference, is that life is considered more precious now because we can preserve it longer and we can keep ourselves healthy longer.
It's quite interesting. As you're talking, I can't help but think, you're describing this 20th century idea of upward mobility and growth. Of course, we all know that's over, right? It's like fewer than 50% of Americans will make, at age 30, make as much money as their parents made at age 30. I know people of my generation are completely saddled by student debt, unaffordable real estate, all other kinds of crises. So I wonder with that, if we're talking about the history of emotions, which is something I believe in very deeply, I think that humans always change with the tools we use and the environments we live in, and it's important to see that not nostalgically or with panic, but just as like it is human nature, that it is in our nature to change because we're social. I wonder what lies ahead. I mean, that's one thing I've thought about a lot in my work, but if we are moving
Can I
out
just
of...
ask you a question?
Yes.
Do you think that technology is serving us in that regard? Is it inadequate? I mean, it seems tonight, from all we've experienced, that this lavish language and this rich texture, this landscape we could draw from, we still have people writing love songs, fortunately, but we don't have that. We don't have that same reservoir to draw upon. So my question is, are we shaping the technology, or is the technology shaping us? When I heard Sherry Turkle last year tell us that when people found out that children that were on their cell phones all the time were losing empathy, the solution at MIT was to produce an app that would make them more empathetic. Don't take the phone away, get another app, which I found astounding. So,
well, I think to answer the first question, which is, are technologies serving us, my question is always we who. You know, whom are they serving? They're serving a few billionaires making quite a lot of money off of these technologies in Silicon Valley, Seattle, and wherever else Amazon decides to land very, very well. So I think, and I mean that not as an evasion, but I think that for me, the way to think about technology has to do with how it's organized, how it's owned, by whom is it designed, and why. Because I don't know about this particular project that Turkle was referring to, but the people who say, oh, the answer to your kids being addicted to the phone or to make a new phone app, I would imagine are people who profit off of phone apps. And I think that this is very much at issue in dating. I mean, when you think about what a dating app is, or what social media are, in a very real sense, what they are video games which get us to volunteer hours of our time every week making money for Mark Zuckerberg or for Barry Diller, who owns AIC, which owns Tinder, or whichever company you're thinking about. So I think it's really hard to separate these questions of how these tools reshape our lives and our human connections without thinking about who owns them and why they're being designed the way they are. And I think for now, they're owned by increasingly monopolistic companies that are designing them to extract a maximum of time spent or attention out of the people who use them, and that can have a limiting effect on how useful they are for seeking love. And I think, I love Shakespeare. Listening to the sonnet, it's like I'm completely blown away. Listening to this poetry, listening to Maya Angelou or whomever. But it is, writing is a technology too. Pen and papers and ink are technologies. Books are technologies. I didn't have them before the Gutenberg revolution. They're carbon and oil-based technologies. That's how they get shipped around. So I think that for me, because I think the temptation of a certain kind of pessimism about technology is very strong, it's always useful to put these questions in context and to think about, not devices, are they good or bad, but it's like, are they good or bad for whom and why, and how are they organizing our economy and our world and our interactions? And there are great things about them as well as negative things about them, I think.
Would anyone like to come and ask another question? Why have you got these wonderful people here?
Quick question about the kinds of technology that have intruded in a way. One of the most powerful things we heard from the artist this evening was a song which everyone started to hum and actually repeat the words of. So we went, in a sense, from the music to the film that was behind it, The Way You Look Tonight, right? To a visual thing. So we went music, film, visual, and re-envisioned a moment of very tender exchange. And in fact, ignited the notion of rather mundane experience being electric. Mm-hmm. I wondered if you'd thought about the way film has reinvented intimacy in a way, such that just repeating the strains on a trombone can call all of that back.
Because my PhD is technically partly in film, if I could take that one for 1 second. I think that one thing that's so powerful, that's implicit in your comment, in your question, and that we were all reacting to in the space tonight is also that cinema at least in its older incarnation, was a communal art form, and so is music, that it's a thing that happens in shared space. I think about Spotify on my iPhone, and it's like I probably I have more music at my fingertips than anyone in history, but it's private. I listen to it by myself, or maybe at most, I make my husband listen to it while we're doing chores, although he has the better playlist, so I usually let him pick. But the thing about the cinema is it's an art of time and of being together in a certain space and time. And I think in that sense, there's something deeply sort of like erotic and connective and interactive about it. It's also a place where American culture depicts. It's both a place where we depict what we think love should be or what love we should aspire to. I feel like in classic screwball comedies of the 1930s and 40s or classic rom-coms of the 1980s and 90s, it's almost philosophical, like it's almost like a platonic dialogue. It's like, can men and women be friends? Like, what if you fell in love with someone pretending to be someone else? And it creates this very democratic sphere for discussing this, about like what we think love should be. But also, unignorably, the cinema is a place to go on a date. And it's both a site, an occasion to go out and do something with other people, and I think a kind of mirror and a target of aspiration. So I think that it's absolutely important, and what's changed to my mind is how much more individualized our devices are. I think what I miss in the cinema, and I don't go to the cinema nearly as often as I used to, is this experience of sharing something, as we all have tonight, together in time, and something that I can't stop when I want to, go get a bowl of cereal or answer my text message, or what have you. It sort of creates a shared space for the culture. I don't know. What do you think about that?
It just reminds me of Sunset Boulevard, when he says to Gloria Swanson, "You used to be big," and she said, "I am big. It's the pictures that have gotten small." Because multiplexes, and that's something else that's been studied actually, the size of the screen and the relationship to the people in the audience and the feeling of being a part of this is directly proportional to the size. So having a multiplex of 12 theaters with smaller screens in it makes the experience less fulfilling, less satisfying. And I don't think anybody quite knows why, but they've done enough studies to say this is a fact. And when Nora Desmond said that, I'm still big, the pictures got small, she was speaking the truth, and that was the very beginning of that trend. And I think it's two things. It's the shared experience as humans in the same room, but it's also the sense of something that just overwhelms you. This has been written about a lot in the last 5 years, about the size of the screen and why movie stars were bigger, literally and figuratively, in the 30s and 40s than they are today.
So have we exhausted all the comments for this evening? I feel like we could go on, but I'm also aware of the clock. I wanted to thank everybody tonight. I think this was absolutely a wonderful fusion of energy and ideas and words, and just sorry there wasn't a filled house to do that. And I'm very grateful to Moira for stepping into the breach at the very last minute, because our main speaker is actually in the ER in DC with her son. Also, Kurt DiCamillo, thank you for bringing your artifacts with you. Johnny, thank you for your wonderful words. Lenny, Mark, and Tim, thank you for the wonderful, wonderful music.